everyone. If you're on the line and waiting, I'm going to start the webinar in about 2 minutes. We're going to give people some time to file in. So here in just about 2 minutes, we'll start presenting. All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Headset Web today. I'm happy that you chose to spend a bit of your day with us. Before we get started, I just want to say, normally when we do these, we have a very nice room with a whole group of people helping me out. Today, because of our Stay Home, Stay Healthy in one that Governor Inslee put out, I am actually at home doing this on my own, though I do have some people also helping remotely. But because it's just a little bit of a different procedure, I ask for your forgiveness if the audio quality isn't as good as it usually is, or if perhaps you hear my dog woof during this. I have explained to my family to be quite quiet, but my dog isn't quite as good of a listener as the others. I do have someone texting back and forth with me if anything should come up with my audio, but if anything is weird, feel free to say it in the chat. Now that I've brought up the chat, I would also like to say, generally we do a question and answer session at the end, which I would still to do. It's very difficult for me to manage the chat and the actual broadcast. So what we've decided to do to make sure questions get answered is if you can just chat your question into the chat box. What we'll do is after done with the webinar, we're going to go through and write answers to all of those questions, and we'll post that on our website for you. And we'll send you an email link out to the presentation as well as the answers to those questions as soon as I can get them answered. Sorry that we can't do it live. It's just a little bit more difficult given that I'm trying to do this at home. So with all of the niceties out of the way, let's go ahead and get started on our BAT analysis webinar. First, I would like to introduce you to Headset if you're new to Headset and haven't worked with us much before. So Headset is a cannabis data intelligence company. We have 3 main product offerings. The first one's called Insights, and this is a market intelligence product. In Insights, we provide daily product level information on sales to help producers, manufacturers, investors, and retailers understand the use of market space. In Insights, you can find information on sales, trend rankings, pricing trends, and even analyze markets like 420 or the impact of COVID-19 on the cannabis industry. We will be using mostly Insights data today. And in fact, we're going to use a lot of our real-time data, because our data is brought into our database in real time, to analyze how COVID-19 has changed some of the trends in the cannabis industry recently. Our second product is called Retailer. Retailer is a business intelligence tool for cannabis retailers to assist them with tracking their sales, optimizing inventory, and streamlining their operations. This tool is meant to help retailers gain a better understanding of their business and use their very own data to make data-driven decisions. In addition, we recently added a benchmarking section, which allows retailers to compare their store to the market around them to determine if they have the correct assortment, pricing strategy, or if their growth is in pace with the industry. Finally, our third product is called Bridge. Beverage is a vendor-managed inventory tool. This tool allows retailers to directly share their data with vendors in order for both of the parties to better be able to manage the store's inventory and get products where they need to be when they need to be there. This helps avoid things like blackouts or overstocks. Now that you know about Headset, I'll tell you about me. This is a picture of me. I don't look nearly this pretty today since I've been working from home for 2 weeks. But this is me. I'm Liz Connors, the Director of Analytics here at Headset. I've been at Headset for about 4 years now. But before that, I worked in data science in the CPG space, analyzed more boring things like vitamins, paper towels, and toilet paper. Though more recently, I don't envy my colleagues still in the paper analytics space. I think that is probably a pretty wild time right now. Though, as we'll see here in a few minutes, cannabis definitely has had some of the sales surges that we get in those more traditional paper goods as COVID-19 has driven consumers to a lot of hoarding. So let's talk about the things we're going to go through today. So today, start by doing a market analysis. And this webinar a few weeks ago, beginning of February, when the world was very different. So really this was just going to be about basket analysis. I've decided to twist the content just a little bit. So what we're going to be doing is market basket analysis, specifically diving into some of the things that are different about market analysis during all of the so what we'll look at today is diagnosing some trends. We'll break down into its drivers, so tickets and average basket, as well as what item in the basket. The data is meant to help you think about how you can drive your revenue forward. So there's really a lot of levers that we can pull as either producers or retail proprietors to increase our total revenues. And today we're going to try to isolate each of those levers to try to come up with strategies to drive our sales even higher. Before I get too much into it, I do want to explain 3 metrics that I'm going to be talking about a lot today. I wanted to give a definition to start. The first one that you'll hear me say a lot is average basket size. At Headset, this is our term for the average receipt value. This is also called sometimes average ticket, and I've heard it average cart, especially in e-commerce. But really the way to think about this is the total amount that the person paid to the retailer in order to acquire their products. So if someone comes in and buys 8 products, spending $90, the average transaction amount there is a $90 transaction. At Headset, all of our sales dollars, as well as our average baskets and average item prices, are all after any discounts received, and they are before consumer paid taxes. So in some states, that's just sales tax. In other states, that's as high as 40% because the excise tax is paid by the consumer. The next metric you'll hear me talk a lot about today is basket penetration. Basket penetration is a fancy term for what percent of total baskets had a given item in it. So if your store, for instance, sells, say, rolling papers, and you see 5% basket penetration for rolling papers, what that would mean is that 5% of your transactions had a rolling paper item in there. Basket penetration is to help us understand how often products are being purchased and what our opportunity to increase that is. Finally, the last metric that's going to be new today is called attachment rate. Attachment rate is the percentage that someone purchases product B if they have also purchased product A. A great example of attachment rate is with shampoo and conditioner. So about 70% of the time that someone purchases shampoo, they also purchase conditioner. So conditioner is 70% attachment shampoo. So we'll look at some attachment rates and also try to decipher what the differences in attachment rates could mean. To get started, just so that everybody can have a baseline, let's look at adult use cannabis sales in a few of the markets that we cover. So here at Headset, we cover, our insights market cover California, Nevada, California, Nevada, and Washington. I have Oregon in here yet, though we don't yet cover it. We also have some Canadian provinces as well. So this is just looking at total sales. These numbers are published by most of the states' regulatory agencies, so we can be very confident in the total sales. But what I want to do today, rather than talk about total sales, is break those down into 2 components. The first component is the total number of baskets, the total number of receipts in the marketplace, and the next component, average basket. So if you multiply the total receipts times the average basket, you would end up with total store revenue. What this really means is, proprietors, we have 2 ways we can pull if we want to increase our revenue. We can either try to get more baskets in our store, or we can try to increase the average basket. So let's look at some of those average baskets across state. So here what we see is in California, the average basket clocks in at just under $60. The next big comparison point there is Washington, where we see an average basket of only $7. I do want to point out a slight nuance there. In Washington, our consumer pays excise tax on the transaction at the end. Go in and buy a $10 package of gummies. I would have about 5% taxes put on that, so I'd end up paying about $14.50. Since our data is reported pre-tax, that makes Washington look just quite a bit lower than some of our other states, with a lot of that just being due to the tax nuances. It doesn't mean that things are necessarily cheaper or that people are buying less here in Washington, as much as I would like to think everything here is cheaper. All right, so, now that we know these average basket sizes, let's go ahead and break down that revenue even further and look at total baskets. So for example, here we can see in Washington where that average basket was just over $25. That means that in the marketplace, there were about 42 million baskets last year. Now, if you're a retailer, the number of tickets is the number of times you were able to interact with a customer. So these were your opportunities to increase your revenue. These were opportunities to sell the products that most contribute to your bottom line. These were opportunities to encourage consumers to perhaps decrease their purchase cycle, come in more often. If you are a brand or a manufacturer, the total number of baskets is the total opportunities you had to get your product in the basket. So if you're trying to do market sizing opportunities, or you're trying to understand if your projections for your revenue are reasonable, we can look at the total number of baskets to decide what % should you be in, and then look to your basket position. So here what we see, for example, in California, where we saw those $60 average basket, that turned to just under 50 million baskets for last year. Now, average basket, we're going to break that down even further. I like these nice, short, concise ways to break down basket. So for average basket, we're going to break that down into two components. That's the average number of items in a basket, as well as the average price per item. These are two ways to think of it. And sorry, I just saw a chat pop up. I did have a question about medical data come in there. I do want to just answer that one straight away. We are just at adult use sales right now. All of this data that we're talking about is just adult use in these states. Anyway, back to the presentation. So let's say that as a retailer, my goal was to increase my average baskets. That's the lever I've chosen to increase my total sales. I really only have ways to do that. I can get people to put more things in their basket, maybe add something on. Or I can try to convince consumers to purchase things that cost more. That could be upping someone from perhaps a value-priced gummy to a mid-priced or premium-priced gummy. That also could be increasing the total size of the product they're buying. So maybe instead of purchasing an eighth, we talk to consumers to try to encourage the purchase of more ounces, for instance. When we break down our average basket into its components, what we see, $60 average basket in California, it has about 2.2 items in it on average, with each of those items costing $25. We can see in Washington, we see just right around 2 items per basket on average. Colorado has our most items per basket, up there at 2.7. Some of it due to the fact that in California, we see a lot of deli style or bulk flower purchases rather than prepackaged. And then there we've got our Canadian provinces as well. So we see that Alberta and British Columbia both look pretty similar, with item is just over $20. That is in Canadian dollars. And average items per basket right around 1.5. We see how some of these metrics have changed as we look at most recent events, particularly the impact of COVID-19. So a lot of states issued orders. Is the reason that I'm doing this remote today. So in states, cannabis operators are allowed to continue operating. In some states, they've moved to delivery, and in some states, they've closed. If you're interested to know where each adult use state stands, we are running a blog right now. So every day we're updating a daily blog with information about the impact of COVID-19 on the cannabis industry. And one of those blog posts details for each US state, as well as each Canadian province has adult use. What is the state of what isn't allowed, which ones are essential, and how they had to change them. So what we're going to look at here is COVID-19's impact on sales. It's kind of a complicated metric that I did here, just like all charts. As we see it go up, that means more. As we see it go down, that means less. And that black line in the middle is our expectation line. So we normalized sales based on the day of the week and the time of the year, and we built an expectation line. And what we see that just before St. Patty's Day, so that it started with Friday the 13th of March, sales rapidly increased in more markets. We were seeing a lot of markets have double the sales volume that they normally see. This was consumers rushing out to buy stuff. We saw a grocery store, pictures of empty shelves. We saw lines. This was not any different for cannabis. So we saw a mad rush of people to stores. A lot of stores were seeing higher levels of sales on 420. So this was a very busy time for retailers. You can see as we start to move later, later through a few days, that for the most part, this has started to taper down. So in Colorado and Washington, we see sales at slightly above usual. My data here ends on the 24th of March. I didn't pull any stuff for yesterday. So in Colorado and Washington, we see relatively just slightly above normal sales. In California, we've seen sales dip below expected average. That is because of the very strict regulations that are in order, as well as some counties changing whether or not cannabis stores can be open or they have to do delivery. In Nevada, we see levels be very low. This is driven by two reasons. I think the primary one is 80% of adult use cannabis sales in the state of Nevada are out of Clark County, which is where Las Vegas is. None of those casinos are open right now. At least I don't think any of them are. So tourism is at a very, very low, if any, level in Las Vegas. And a lot of the revenue is driven by tourism. The other reason is the dispensaries that are allowed to operate in Nevada are operating, at least to my knowledge, under delivery only. I know that was true at the beginning of the week. I'm pretty sure it's still true now, though information does change very quickly. So that's why we see Nevada be quite lower. But what I want to do is dig into that purple line, which is Washington. So we see sales be almost double their regular volumes. Let's try to see what was causing that. Is it a lot more people in stores, or is it driven, in fact, by higher basket sizes? So here we're looking at average basket by day in 2020. So you can kind of see this predictable trend, larger baskets on the weekend. It actually is a very beautiful seasonal trend. As we get to the end of February, you see the whole line shift upward. Our first cases of COVID in Washington, around the Seattle area, were at the end of February. So we started to see basket sizes tick up as more and more information comes to light about what is expected because of this virus. But after we started to put the recommended stay-in-place orders as well as the finalized stay home, stay healthy order, we see, oh, geez, sorry, there you go. Little blip, trying to work through this. All right, there you go. There, now we see the basket size hop up quite. We go from average baskets in Washington. Remember, our average was somewhere around $26 through 2018. We see that hop up toward the end of last week, coming up above $35. So a lot of this is being by larger basket sizes. It's not necessarily many more consumers in store. We saw maybe like a 15% increase in total transactions. Instead, this is mostly being driven by people purchasing large amounts when they're in there. We know that average basket can be broken down into two things. We talked about that a moment ago. So one is the average item price, and the other is the average number of items. So here we're looking at the same leap in average baskets, and we see that the average number of items is slightly up. So we're getting to the point there where we're getting, I think even in the last couple of days, we've hopped just over an average of 3 items in Washington. But we also have average item price coming up. Now remember, we talked about average item price. There's kind of 2 ways to increase your average item price across your store. You can either convince people to purchase more premium products, or you can convince people to purchase larger package sizes. And so in Washington, find is it's much more the latter. We see people buying much larger package sizes. So this is an increase in the sales over the trailing 4 weeks on March 13th to the 18th. That was just before we had our stay in residence orders here in Washington. You see is that ounces are up nearly 100%, and that compares to grams, which only saw a very small lift. So we know that this is people spending more money. They're buying larger packages of products. This is a really big shift. So if you're a store or you're a brand and you're thinking about having the right products available to people, this sales shift mix can really affect your inventory levels. And in fact, we're seeing all sorts of wild things as we try to analyze inventory over this time, especially as people shift to these bigger packages, which used to be less common. On average, just looking at some of the inventory levels in the industry, we find that, for instance, in the state of California, the average retailer had about 4.7 inventory on hand pre-COVID. So I think there were mid-January to mid-February of 2020. When we look most recently, we find that most stores have about 3.3 weeks of inventory on hand. So these sales increases are up, or these total sales volumes are up, but a lot is selling through the back. So what we find is that there is fewer inventory, just like true in our grocery stores right now. You might have difficulty finding the exact product you want as these inventory levels start to come down. The only nuance here is Nevada. And again, Nevada is where we see demand has really, actually, with the decrease in tourism traffic there. Now we see that Nevada actually could satisfy almost 2 months of demand with what's in the closets. A lot of that isn't because they've had shipments come in, rather it's because demand has really decreased over the last few weeks. So let's move on to basket penetration. Just a quick reminder, basket penetration is a percentage of total store baskets or total transactions in your store that contain the selected products. So to give a quick example of that, here I've got 4 just quick ease baskets for you. So let's say we had a market in the state of Washington. There were only 4 baskets sold last year, teeny market, and these were what the baskets looked like. So our first basket had 3 items, a tincture, a flower item, and a bowl. Our next basket had 1 pickle and 1 edible, and so on. So the way that we would calculate basket penetration in this teeny tiny fake market is we set tinctures. There's 1 in 4 baskets, and so these have a 25% basket penetration. Next, we see flour. So in our 4 baskets, we see 2 of those baskets contain a flour item. This is 50% basket penetration. 50% of baskets contain flour. Next, we'll do edibles. So 3 edible items sold, but 2 of those were within the same basket. Of the 4 baskets in the marketplace, 2 contained edibles. So that should be a 50% basket penetration. I will fix that on the slides before we set out. That should be 2 baskets with a 50% basket penetration. Next, we'll do topicals. Topicals, you can see there's just that 1 basket there. So 1 basket at 5% basket penetration. All right. Oops, left out vapor pens there. So you can see there are 3 vapor pens, 2 of which, 2 baskets of which vapor pens in them. So 2 of the 4 baskets with vapor pens, 50% basket penetration. So that was that example is just a quick one to show you market. Let's look at real markets. So here would have combined all US markets together, and we're going to look at the basket penetration by category. So that what we find is that about 50% of baskets or 50% of transactions in the United States, this is looking at just January of 2020 till February of 2020. I'm not doing any of March here. What we find is that 50% of baskets had a flower item in them. So 1 and 2 baskets in the store would have a flower item in it. That I'd like to talk about a little bit that we'll look at a couple of places is pre-rolls. So pre-rolls are, it depends on the market, but usually around 10, maybe 15% of sale. However, we find them in 20% of baskets. And one of the reasons it's important to think about basket penetration when you're thinking about market share is because if our goal is to increase market share, we only have 2 ways to do that. We can either get people that are already buying pre-rolls to buy more of them, or we can get pre-rolls in more baskets. So if I'm trying to come up with a strategy to get my pre-roll sales to increase, I need to think about how to get in these 70% of baskets that I'm not already in. These are people that are in stores, they are buying, they're just not buying my category. Or I need to, I'm on 30% baskets. How do I get it so that I have an even larger share of that basket? We'll look at some of that basket share here in a minute. Let's do a bit of COVID analysis now. So we're looking at penetration here. Here we're looking at Colorado. So I'm comparing a blended average of January and February of 2020 to March 23rd. So 23rd was a very interesting day in Colorado. That day, the mayor of Denver said that recreational cannabis stores would have to close that night. They were not considered essential. That order was quickly reversed before it could go into effect. However, we saw very large spikes in sales as people went out to stock up on items that they thought that they wouldn't be able to purchase in the near-term future. So sales look very different on this day as consumers go in to do stock ups. So one of the things I want to point out is flower. So whereas in Colorado, we usually see about 52% of baskets contain flower, 61% of them contain flower as people came in to make purchases right before that ordinance went into effect. And pre-roll looks a little different. So in pre-roll, we actually see fewer baskets containing pre-roll items. Throughout all of this COVID market changes, we see not doing quite as well as some of our other categories. So edibles generally are a bit. Pre-rolls have to only see modest increases, I think just because of the way the product is generally consumed. So now let's look at solo baskets. So I told you that 50% of baskets in the marketplace contain flower. But what I want to point out next is that 65% of that 50%, there's actually nothing else in the basket. It's people buying just flower. So they came into the store, they bought only flower items. These are a place that we could think about trying to develop a strategy to increase maybe the attachment rate of other products onto those baskets. So with 65% of flower baskets having nothing else in them, we know that the attachment rate to flower isn't going to be very high. Perhaps, though, it makes sense to have some strategies to get people that are purchasing flower items to buy other things, maybe to add a pre-roll into the basket or to add a beverage. I do want to point one thing down here. So in beverages, tinctures and sublinguals, capsules and capsules, you'll see all of these have a slightly lower percent of baskets with no other categories in them. The slightly lower rates of solo baskets can tend to mean that these items are often added to a basket. So they might not be the reason that someone's coming to a store. They might not be the trip driver, but they often attach themselves to other items. And we're going to specifically look here in Colorado. Again, we'll hop back into that COVID analysis at January and February compared to that March 23rd. Here we'll look specifically at beverages. So beverages in Colorado, in January and February, about 21% of those purchases were solo. So there's nothing else bought, it was just beverage. We see that percentage fall on March 23rd to be 15%. This is a statistically different percentage. Likely, what could be happening here is that as consumers came in to stock up, they were grabbing beverages and adding them to their cart, much like perhaps you would add a candy bar to your cart when you shop at the grocery store. These types of insights should help us as we think about merchandising our stores. So if any of you have ever shopped at Sephora, Sephora is great at this. To get up to the line at Sephora, you have to follow this windy queue where you're just presented with tons of bins of all these little items that are very easy to pick up. This drives up your average basket in your stores by trying to get these smaller items to attach themselves to the bigger baskets. Now, I know that most stores can't merchandise themselves quite like Sephora, but that doesn't mean that you couldn't near your store perhaps be promoting some of those items like those or those pre-rolls that are a little bit lesser in price, but maybe could be in themselves to baskets more often. Next, we're going to look at the percent of sales to a category. So here what we're doing, so for instance, there on the left, we have flour. So a flour basket on average, that basket is made up of 75% of its dollars are to flour products. So often people buy things together. In fact, multi-category baskets are common. About half of baskets in the marketplace contain at least 2 categories. But that doesn't mean that every category is going to act the same in terms of what's added to it. So here we'll look at California. This is not COVID data. This is just California on average. What we see is that a flour basket on average is about $64. I'm doing my fast math right, with 46 of those dollars being to flour. So we see only a small percentage of that total basket is to other items. That looks pretty different than if we go all the way to the right to beverages. So a beverage basket on average is actually larger basket with flour. A basket with a beverage in it is $79 on it in California. But most of that money, 58 of those dollars, are actually spent on other categories. So here what we're seeing is that beverages are an add-on to a lot of these baskets, right? This is a way to drive our basket total size. So they're not perhaps the reason that every consumer is coming in, but it's something that consumers often add in the basket. You can kind of see a similar, they're not quite as pronounced effect in both pre-rolls and edibles as well. I've flirted with attachment rate a little bit. Let's do attachment rate. So just a reminder from the beginning, attachment rate measures how many add-on products your business sells with each major product. So for example, if someone purchases product A, what's the percent likelihood that they'll purchase product B? This is called attachment rate. So for instance, I think the example I gave at the start was shampoo and conditioner. So conditioner exits itself to shampoo 70% of the time. So 70% of the time when someone comes in to buy shampoo, they'll also grab conditioner. A really great attachment rate to think about, something that's really actionable for retailers, is when you're thinking about flour and accessories. If someone is buying flour, perhaps they want a grinder, perhaps they want a lighter, perhaps they want rolling papers. So we would hope to see the attachment rate of accessories be quite high on flour. They do a way to consume that. And so all of the accessories that can help in the consumption of flour are a great way to increase that average basket. So minding your attachment accessory to flour and doing your best to drive that up is a great way to increase your average baskets, which we know is one of the only 2 ways to increase your total revenue. A quick attachment rate example here for you. Hopefully there's not a typo on the slide as well. So here in attachment rate, what we see is that we have 4 baskets here up at the top, 4 made up baskets. So we see 4 baskets, all 4 of them have flour, but 2 of those baskets, the basket 1 and basket 2, both also have topicals. So the attachment rate of topicals to flour is 50%. In addition, so still looking at basket 1 and 2, those 2 baskets with topicals, we see one of those contains an edible. So the attachment rate of edibles to topicals is all 50%. So 50% of baskets also contain an edible. So let's look at, instead of these examples, let's look at some of the real data. So here we're looking at the attachment rate items to flour baskets. So of all the baskets, and remember that we know that about 50% of baskets contain flour. So of all those baskets, what else is in them? Well, remember, 65% of those baskets have nothing else in them. So here we're going to examine the ones that do have other things. So what we see first is pre-rolls have the highest attachment rate. So in 15% of baskets that have flour in them, pre-rolls are also attached to that basket. The next most common thing to attach to flour is an edible. And then there we see a vapor pen all the way on the right. 8.6% of flour purchasers or of flour baskets also contain a pre-roll. If you're doing some fast math, what you'll see is that all of these would add up to more than 35%. That's our percent of baskets that have things other than flour. That's because baskets can have 3, 4, 5 categories in them. So when we're working with attachment rates, we don't ever want to be adding them up. We don't want to think about them in aggregate. Instead, we want to be comparing them to one another. And so what we see here is we have that 15% attachment rate of pre-rolls and that 8.6 attachment rate of vapor pens. So perhaps what we should be thinking about as a store is a pre-roll attachment rate high enough? Do I need to bring that number up? Would that help? Or perhaps we find something surprising. The vapor pens was actually surprising to me. I didn't expect the attachment rate to be that high. Two different consumption methods, both fairly expensive items in the store as well. So this is a very particular type of transaction. These transactions are very large in size. So it's worth thinking about what drives these transactions and how can we get to the store. Let's move to a different category. Here we're going to look at edibles. So the attachment rate of edibles, the attachment rate of products to edibles is what you're seeing here. So we'll look at pre-rolls again. Remember, we saw that pre-rolls attach themselves to about 15% of flour baskets. However, pre-rolls actually attach themselves to 21% of edible baskets. So the attachment rate of pre-rolls to edibles is higher than flour. Another thing that's surprising, I kind of had to think about it. My hypothesis is perhaps these are both convenience plays. So these don't require maybe quite as much. You don't really have to consume either of them, right? An edible, you can just open it with your hands. A pre-roll, all you need a lighter, and it's pretty easy to bum one of those off of somebody if you don't have one. But so here what we see is that pre-roll attachment rate is quite high. We also see a lot of vapor pens just with edibles. So to me, what this looks like is the edible consumer likely is consuming a whole lot of things. So if we're thinking about marketing an edible consumer, we probably should be aware that these attachment rates are quite high compared to attachment rates on flower, for instance, right? These are much lower. So the flower consumer is much likely to be purchasing other things than the edible consumer. We talked about pre-roll a little bit. I want to flip the way we talked. What we were talking about before was flower baskets and what attached to them. Here we're looking at the attachment rate of pre-rolls to other categories. So you can see that 21% to edible that we talked about, that 15% to flower. Here we're looking at all those other categories. So actually the most common thing that pre-rolls attach themselves to is beverages. So when someone buys a beverage, 30% of the time, they're also buying a pre-roll. It's a very high attachment rate, especially for products that aren't consumed together. So products that are meant to be consumed together, like shampoo and conditioner, for instance, peanut butter and jelly, these things always have high attachment rates. This beverage to pre-roll attachment rate is so high that it makes me think that people are often consuming them together. You can see it stand out very different than all the ones around it. So that's everything I was planning to go through today. Just kind of to do a quick recap. We went through the market basket analytics to understand some of those key revenue drivers. We learned about basket penetration and attachment rates. The goal of that being us come up with strategies to increase our total average basket by increasing attachment rates or by getting people more things. And finally, we looked at a lot of the COVID effects in the industry. I didn't do everything I could have for COVID. We're actually updating a daily blog right now. So in the, if you go to our website, I think there's a spot that you'll be able to click on if you like, or in these slides, there will be a link to it. It's that hot pink link right there. We update this every day with an impact of COVID on the industry. So we've looked at inventory levels, we've looked at sales changes, we've looked at what types of products are people purchasing. I have some attachment rate stuff I'll put up there today. We also did a look at how different markets are changing, how cannabis operators need to operate in these times. So please check back to that blog. There's a lot of information in there. I am going to leave the webinar open for a few minutes for you to submit your questions. Again, I'm not going to be answering any questions, but please do submit them in the chat. And then hopefully by the end of the day today, I have all of the answers to those questions typed up, and we'll also put those together for you with the slides. So if you do have questions, submit them. Thanks for coming today. I really appreciate everybody coming out to listen, take some time out of your day. And yeah, reach out to Headset if we can help you with any data. Thanks, everyone.